US Sport.
On Off the Ball.
With 888 Casino. 18 plus cgamblingcare.ie.
All right, another wild weekend of NFL. That I'd say Cian Fahey is with us. Cian, how are you?
I think wild weekend might be overselling that a little bit. There was a wild 15-minute period, and the rest of it was like you could have just slept through and been happy to miss it all, to be honest.
Sell the sizzle, buddy. That's how it works, right?
Well, if you enjoy kickers missing key kicks, I guess, and if you enjoy just insanity, just mad stuff happening for 15 minutes to the point that you're absolutely wrecked, that you don't even need to watch the late games, that's what this weekend was for you. And to be honest, I still enjoyed it, even though a lot of it was a lot of a slog.
Well, a generational performance from Saquon Barkley at the precise moment that his former team are imploding to the point where the fans are, not the precise moment, 3 hours later, but the same weekend. I'm sticking by it. Another wild weekend. The Panthers nearly beat the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, that would have been Pep Guardiola levels of swoon happening at Kansas. Obviously, they managed to dig themselves out of it. Before we get into this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but have you any theory about why the kickers are suddenly shit?
I think our standards in general are just higher. I don't think they're actually worse, and it's also we're probably scoring more points. I know this year hasn't necessarily followed the recent trend over recent years of massive scoring, but in general we're scoring more. They've moved the extra point back, so extra points are being missed more often, which is to be expected. And the expectation now is every single kick inside the 40 is meant to be automatic, and you're expecting your kicker to make 50 and 51, 52, 53 yard field goals. You have to kind of get to 55 before it becomes a point of maybe he'll make this. So I don't actually think they're worse, and stats might not back that up. That I might be completely wrong on all that. I think our just expectations are way higher, and there's also an element I think of like someone like Brandon Aubrey who was brought in because he can hit long range kicks, like someone like Justin Tucker who's just having a down year, but historically for his career he can hit those long range kicks. There's a premium on that now, I think, whereas in the past if you had an Adam Vinatieri or the Jeff, I can't remember the Steelers kicker, his second name always escapes me, but they had these kickers who would like hit every single field goal within 30, 35 and 40 and wouldn't even attempt ones over 40 back in the day. If you have one of them now, it kind of feels like you're limiting yourself a bit. So I don't think teams go for that kind of style of kicker anymore. Okay,
let's talk about what's going on with the Giants and compare and contrast it with what happened with Saquon Barkley. So Daniel Jones got benched and everybody assumed, okay, it's the Drew Lock era. And then it's like, we ain't playing no Drew Lock here for fear we might have to pay him extra money. That didn't seem to make any sense to anybody, because just recently, as everybody expected the Daniel Jones news to come through, there have been puff pieces about how Drew Lock was a more mature fella. He was going to be one of those characters who comes through having had the setbacks late. There's been several of these in the league just recently who've made it much later on than we thought they were going to make it. And now we're not even going to get the opportunity to see him.
Yeah, bad teams say bad because of how they're run more than anything else. And this is a great example of it. Like the Giants historically have considered a team that's been run well, but it's because they've often had someone like Tom Coughlin and Eli Manning who's just got in and stayed there for 10 plus years and everything figured out. Ever since then, everything's been a struggle, and it's because of decisions like this. So Daniel Jones got benched initially, and he got benched rather than released because they wanted to protect from the injury guarantee. So they're essentially just paying him an amount of money to go away. He went in on Friday and requested his release. They were happy to let him go and get him out of the door, which by in itself, not a real big problem. That's fine. You have to move on from Daniel Jones. He wasn't going to start for you again. He wasn't going to turn it around at this stage. We all knew that. So Drew Lock was brought in the offseason because Drew Lock is better than a 2, essentially. He's a 2 with an upside. He's still a young quarterback. He's a very talented quarterback. He was a high pick in the draft. He's made some incredible plays in this league. He's never put it together consistently, obviously. Or if he had, he'd still be at the Denver Broncos. He was meant to be the number 2, and he is still the number 2, but the number 1 is now Tommy DeVito, who was the number 3. And the reason for that is they want to save $1 million. Now, $1 million to you and me is kind of a lot of money. $1 million to the New York Giants is basically nothing. And I'm trying to balance out on, you're trying to save money here. Maybe you're thinking about trying to tank and secure your draft picks. But what's the value of all those Giants fans who were leaving midway through the fourth quarter at the weekend? What's the value of all those Giants fans who just did not go to the game at the weekend, which I imagine there was a lot of? Maybe in New York, maybe the money you have, maybe you can absorb all that. But it's very much against the general direction of NFL teams. And you've still got a head coach there who's hoping to be there next year. It's not like you've already sacked your head coach and you're already embracing that full-on rebuild. You only moved the quarterback on. So very, very confusing, very, very damaging week for the Giants. And you mentioned the timing. The other part of this is we saw that clip going around this week of when they moved on from Barkley in the offseason. And when they had the phone call with Barkley, you could kind of tell the attitude with Barkley there was, I don't really trust you guys. I'm kind of sick of what you guys have been talking to me and the way you've been talking to me. And one thing from that really, really bothered me, where at the end of the phone call, they said to Saquon, oh, look, you can go and test free agency, test the market and come back to us and then we'll decide if we match it or not. And they kind of said to him, are you going to give us your word that you're going to do this? And I'm kind of going, you're letting him go to free agency. He doesn't know you anything. You can ask him to run it back for you, but the phrasing of it and the way you were talking to him, I'm not surprised he was happy to get out of there, and I'm not surprised he was happy to go to a division rival and obviously thrive the way he has. For the Giants moving forward, though, next year, you've got $60 million in cap space after this move. You're probably going to have a top 5 pick. The only problem is the expectation is there's not going to be a quarterback worthy of a top 5 pick next year. So we'll see how it plays out with them. I just don't think they've handled any of this well. Realistically, Daniel Jones should have been benched a month or two ago. Locke should already be in and have played 4 or 5 games, and we should know whether he's an option moving forward or not. Like, they could have wound up even with a Geno Smith type like Seattle got, and they're happy enough with Geno for the most part.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And Geno was the obvious comparison in my head when I was talking about that at the top there. Like, there is a possibility that he might be capable of doing that based on the puff pieces that were no doubt, sent out there by his agent. And who am I to criticise the agents for doing that? But like, there is a possibility that there is a retread quarterback out there, and you get another great defensive piece. And next year, their identity is, we have this incredible defense, make some reasonable free agent signings, and actually, you can turn these things around quite quickly, as we've seen in a well-run franchise, which at the moment there is no sign of them being one of those.
But not only that, you've also, like, Saquon left, obviously. Saquon wanted to leave for money and for the team functioning and all that kind of stuff. But Saquon also spent years there realizing what it's like to be on a team that doesn't win and being the guy that gets the blame when things go wrong and the guy who's trying to make all these impossible plays. Who did they just draft in the first round last year? Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is now in a situation where, do I want to be Terry McLaurin? Would I've got to wait around for 5 or 6 years before I get a quarterback who's actually serviceable and able to do anything? Obviously, you've got control of him for the next 2 years. But if he decides to sit out after his second year, or if he starts to try and push his way out because they're not figuring out their offense and figuring out their quarterback position, now you've not only ruined your opportunity to find a new quarterback, you're starting to impact the rest of the offense around him, because that's not a team that's built for a long-term rebuild. That's a team that's there that could be competitive right now if a bunch of things were done properly that haven't been done properly.
So, Daboll was Coach of the Year at the end of January, February 2023. He's obviously a reasonable coach, but presumably he moves on?
Well, to me, like, because the NFL is such a place where, like, remember Josh McDaniels? Josh McDaniels walked away from, was it the Colts job, I think? And then he eventually got the other job with the Raiders. But he became this guy who was kind of black marked a little bit because he left the Rams, he left the Colts, and he kind of looked out for himself. So, but to me, if I'm Brian Daboll right now, I'm looking out for myself. I should be trying to leave this franchise and get another job. Generally, that's not the way NFL head coaches work, because there's only 32 of those jobs and you're not guaranteed one. Look at the likes of Bill Belichick in the offseason. Everyone thought he was guaranteed a job, is gone without one, will be probably trying to get another one after this season, unless he decides to stay in the media. So I don't think the Giants are going to necessarily be forcing him out the door, but I could imagine we reach January and we've got this conversation where suddenly there's a mutual agreement, a mutual announcing of parting ways, instead of Daboll resigning and going to get a job where he can actually work. Like, for example, like, I know Sean McDermott's doing brilliant in Buffalo, but if they have another bad playoff loss after this season, Daboll's a guy they love in Buffalo, so Daboll's a guy who could wind up back there again, you know?
Yeah, look, it is always interesting to see where these good coaches who are in a bad situation end up. But again, unless Daboll is involved in hiring the GM, which may well be that they've decided they want him to be part of that next, then there's actually no point in working, as we've seen, with a GM who you don't get on with, who signs players for a style of play that is for the coach that he wants to get, which is going to be the coach eventually. He just hasn't got around to getting you fired yet. So, Crimey River, New York, tough luck. You've enough Super Bowls in your history.
They're still the best team in New York, though. The best NFL team in New Jersey, at least.
Well, not according to their standing. The Jets have one more win than them this year.
Wow. That surprises me. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah,
I suppose the Jets' defense is pretty good. To be fair, let's give them that credit.
They are still 2-9. The Jags are 2-9, and Vegas are 2-9 as things stand. So they would be the teams picking 1, 2, and 3. Jacksonville, Giants, Vegas in that order. New England are the 4th pick as things stand. The Panthers are showing some mild signs of life. Does this say something about the Panthers, or does this say something about Kansas City and where they are at the moment?
Can we just take a moment to just imagine just how small guy would be right now if Bryce Young had pulled out that win and they'd beaten the Chiefs? He was pretty damn good at the end of that game, and he made a bunch of throws that we all knew he was capable of making. Having Adam Thielen back in gives him that outlet against the blitz, because the Chiefs were desperately trying to blitz the passing game. They were trying to play that man coverage, shut down Xavier Legette, shut down the rookie receivers there who were making plays. I think it probably tells us more about the Chiefs and where they are right now rather than it does about the Panthers. I think the Panthers are getting better. They're doing generally better than they did at the start of the year. But I mean, realistically, it was either get better, be better than you were at the start of the year, or be one of the worst teams in NFL history. So they've regressed a bit to the mean. So that's kind of thankful for them. From the Chiefs' point of view, like, if you sat back and watched that game like I did for the most part, without really thinking about the overall macro aspects of this and where each team stands, what their record is, whether one will be keep competing for the Super Bowl or not, if you didn't recognize any of who the players were, you'd be thinking, well, these are two very similar teams, two teams that are on the exact same level, and it's just not true. It's just like they needed Mahomes to pull them through. He made that running play at the end to set up the game-winning field goal. Very typical Mahomes playoff move. Like, we don't see that in the regular season all that often because he hasn't historically done that. He's tried to protect himself a little bit more, but he's making that run where he's making defenders miss. He's picking his spots, and I think like it's really, really concerning for the Chiefs if you're looking like we're kind of repeating ourselves because we've talked about this over and over again. You're relying on Xavier Worthy to make plays. He's not ready to make yet. You're relying on DeAndre Hopkins, who did pretty well, but JC Horn's a very good cornerback, so JC Horn was able to contain him quite a bit. It was really physical, kind of beat them up matchup, which is a weird thing to say about a defensive back and a wide receiver. But the overall takeaway from it is the Chiefs, again, limped through a game and got a victory that you don't necessarily feel like they deserved. I wouldn't be overly optimistic about them at this point, but the problem is we're not really pointing to anyone else who's a juggernaut in the AFC and running away with things. There's a bunch of those teams on the same level, and there's another one of them who we can talk about from this weekend as well in the Texans. So I think it's a game where both teams kind of went in the directions they were already going in. The Panthers are getting a little bit better every time, and the Chiefs are getting more and more concerning the more they play, I feel like. Okay,
that's interesting. Like, again, obviously because they have Mahomes, and when he is in playoff mode, it will be slightly different. And so what we might expect is that there'll be no blowouts for them throughout the playoffs this year, that if they are going to win, it'll be very tight games where he's doing some magic stuff. Maybe that's enough for us to look forward to.
Well, one of the question marks I have is, if you're approaching this offense now, are you really concerned about Travis Kelce? Because Noah Gray is the one making all the plays. Noah Gray has been fantastic as a backup tight end, but you then come back to Noah Gray doesn't necessarily have that skill set that's going to take you over the top in a really tight game in the playoffs. You don't expect him to break off these huge gains or make defenders miss in such a way that Kelce did, which is always a critical part. And I know Kelce has been somewhat effective, somewhat serviceable, but even that, compared to the level he's been later in his career, that's just not what what the Chiefs have had. That's not what you expect from them. The similar issue with Kareem Hunt being in the backfield. He's making good plays, a good physical runner between the tackles, but once you get him outside, he doesn't have that burst that he used to have. He doesn't have that agility and quickness to make defenders miss in space. It's a very kind of stuck in the mud kind of Torridge defense or Torridge offense where you're trying to actually move the ball, whereas previously you were moving the ball, it was like everyone on ice skates flying as fast as they wanted to be. Now it's kind of like every game is stuck in mud, every game is dragging your feet a little bit more, and it's to do with aging, but it's also just to do with the overall talent level on the team that hasn't been upgraded, and that's a byproduct of the way they've managed their cap over recent years. It's a byproduct of having to pay Patrick Mahomes, of having to pay Kelce, and having to pay Chris Jones, which is moves they had to make. So you can't really turn around and blame anyone here. It's just this is where they're at in their development curve. In a year or two, they'll have those contracts will be friendlier than they are right now. Kelce contract will probably be gone, obviously, and they'll be able to reinvest more money. They'll be able to go out and make big free agent splashes and stuff like that. So it's very much, I kind of said it last year. Last year was the year to beat the Chiefs and not let them win the Super Bowl because they were a poor team last year, essentially. This year, I think they're probably worse this year, but it's more due to injuries and stuff like that, like losing Pacheco and losing Rashee Rice. So I'm kind of saying the same thing as I said last year. It didn't turn out to be true. This is the year to win the Super Bowl if you're an AFC team. This is the year to beat them in the playoffs because they're not set up to beat playoff teams.
Okay, did we do enough on Saquon? I mean, he was absolutely sensational against the Rams last night.
Nowhere near enough. Nowhere near enough. This was. He had 302 yards. Yeah, 302 yards rushing and receiving in the game. So that's in the modern era. So basically since the 2000s, 1990s, whatever it is, there's only 5 players who've ever had more than that in the game. Calvin Johnson, 329. That time he went off for 329 receiving yards. Adrian Peterson, 315 back in 2007. Priest Holmes, 307. Antonio Brown, 306. Josh Jacobs, a bit of a weird one on this list, to be honest, because he's not like the other players in terms of how elite he is and all that kind of stuff. He's 303. And then you've got Saquon Barkley at 302. Like that, 255 yards and 47 receiving yards is ridiculous. He's ninth on in top. He ranked ninth in terms of rushing yards in a single game all time, 255. The highest ever is Adrian Peterson at 296. It's the he's on pace to break Eric Dickerson's rushing record for the full season at 2,151 rushing yards would be Saquon Barkley's total. Of course, that's with an extra game, so I don't necessarily value that the way other people will. I don't think it's a fair thing to hold up a 17-game sample against a 16-game sample. But beyond that, if you go back to the game itself, in the first half, he had one run that was over 10 yards, just 11 yards is all it was towards the end of the second quarter. He was getting 6, 8, 6, 7, 8, like that consistently, and he was showing his value as how powerful a runner is, how he's able to be a resilient runner, take these hits and keep going back. And then on the first play in the second half, he breaks off that 70-yard touchdown. The amazing thing about it is he's sprinting through the middle of the defense. He's about 9 yards downfield, and he's got one defender in front of him and a receiver coming from the outside. And he cuts to the outside. And if you're watching on the broadcast angle, it does not look like he's cut at all. He doesn't slow down at all. His legs barely change, and then you actually see the end zone angle, and you can see he makes this really hard change of direction, but he's done it with such fluidity, at such pace, that it looks like he hasn't changed direction at all, but he has massively. And then in the fourth quarter, you have that incredible acceleration where he just goes around the edge and gets his other 70-yard touchdown. He's one of those guys where he's had all these injuries, he's getting a little bit older, he's not old, and he could say, oh, I'm in the best shape of my career. Every time any player says that, you're like, yeah, that's nonsense, you're actually in terrible condition compared to what you were when you were 22. With him, I think he's actually faster now. I think he's faster now than he was when he was 22 and 23, and he came out of college as a generational athlete. So whatever he's doing, whatever they've worked on to sort out his ACL and sort out all of the injuries he's had, it's working, and he's like, right now we need to try and push him back into that MVP conversation. I know, and I'm the guy who only ever wants to give it to quarterbacks, but you can't deny what he's done so far, and that game last night was just ridiculous, incredible.
The run they're on at the moment, it is so spectacular. We have to start talking about the Eagles as Super Bowl contenders. They just need to get out of the way of Saquon and put enough around the rest of the offense so that you have to stay at least a little bit honest about their receivers, who are very, very good, and the quarterback just needs to hit enough of the receivers and the tight end, and they should be fine. So,
well, AJ Brown had over 100 yards last night. None of us even noticed it or talk about it because of how good Saquon was. But like, AJ Brown is an absolute nightmare to try and stop too. So even if you do shut down Saquon, good luck stopping those receivers.
The wildness, I think, and the best part about the weekend, I suppose, is there's the young quarterbacks, the 1 and 2 pick, the Washington-Dallas game, and then the Bears game as well. There was drama in both of those. How it is that you're losing to Dallas at this point, I don't know. But Washington managed it from a situation where all looked lost. They got themselves back into it, and then all looked lost again.
Yeah, this was, I was talking to Mick earlier before we started here, and we were trying to describe how this 10 minutes of football went and how it felt watching it in the red zone. And it's kind of like if Walter White created football, that's what you had for that 10 minutes. It was a bit, I leave it there in terms of that analogy instead of going further into it. But there's 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and Washington are down 20-9. Daniels gets that touchdown drive, and it's 20-17 because they get the 2-point conversion. Turpin drops the kickoff and somehow takes it back with a spin move to the end zone. So now it's 27-17 with 3 minutes left. Daniels gets a very quick field goal drive. There's 2 minutes left. So now it's 27-20. McLaurin scores an 86-yard touchdown in a prevent Hail Mary situation, which, by the way, whenever a defense concedes an 86-yard touchdown at the very end of the game, you have to blame the defense. But oh my God, that throw. That throw is so good and so difficult. And beyond that, the way Terry McLaurin approaches it is even better, because he, instead of running his route the way you expect him to run right through the ball, he angles back inwards. So he's actually coming back inside when he's catching the ball, which is the exact opposite of what everyone expects you to do in that situation, because you're supposed to be trying to get to the sideline when there's only 30 seconds left in the game. Then you have that acceleration to just take away from the whole secondary. McLaurin is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and I'm so happy for him that he's got a quarterback now who can put the ball in his hands. But anyway, they score that touchdown. The kicker misses the extra point, like we were talking about kickers earlier on, and then the Cowboys return the onside kick for a touchdown. So it's the only time in history where there's been 2 touchdowns scored for either team within the final 3 minutes of the fourth quarter, and Washington came out on the wrong side of that. But like you mentioned, how are you losing to the Cowboys right now? That's the main question mark here. How are you in a situation where you can't beat that Cowboys team has its backup quarterback in, that's been terrible on defense for the most part this year, that's been picked apart by lots of different offenses? Here's the main problem, and we've talked about it previously. The way the offense is set up with Cliff Kingsbury, it's not a coincidence that they score all their points at the end when Kingsbury's play calling isn't really happening, because they're in speed up. You have to go use a certain amount of plays that you have. The quarterback's probably calling plays as much as the offensive coordinators in that scenario. Kingsbury is still using all these curl routes. He's still keeping his quarterback too stationary. What that did was it invited Micah Parsons and the rest of the Cowboys defensive front to get pressure on the quarterback, which is something we've talked about previously, where the Cowboys defense, if you stay in the center of the field and you try and just run basic curl routes and simple static structures, you don't get motion moving left and right, they'll feast on you. They'll get pressure over and over and over again. But if you move them left to right, if you try and pull them in different ways, if you use lots of different play action, they'll give you wide open plays. And the Washington offense didn't do that. So they needed to do that before the fourth quarter. If they had, they'd have probably blown the Cowboys out. But oftentimes in the NFL, coaches beat themselves, unfortunately, and that's what happened here.
Why is it that you've said Caleb Williams is finally looking like the first number 1 overall pick?
Well, that's similar thing. What a game! What a performance from him! Like he's been someone I haven't really been impressed with this year. I think he's looked lost too often. You haven't seen the upside with that massive arm talent that he's supposed to have. But he was splitting the Vikings coverage over and over again. Him and Keenan Allen had 3 plays where Keenan Allen was fairly well covered actually, and Caleb Williams just split the defenders by putting the ball right in the spot, equidistant between the 2 outstretched hands for big plays. He did that throughout the game. He also had an incredible play to DeAndre Swift where he evaded an unblocked blitzer off the edge, was running sideways and threw the ball, essentially moving sideways. So he was throwing it like that across his face, down the sideline, a perfect touch pass in between 2 defenders to Swift for the big play. And then at the end, you see him run a scramble for a 4th and 4 where he jumps over a defender on the ground before hitting an incredible throw over the middle, a touch pass over 2 extended defenders for I think it was Roma Dunze to catch the not the game winner, but the game tying play, because it set up the field goal to push the game to overtime. Yeah, he still had all the little issues that you have with a rookie quarterback, where his mechanics cost him a few open throws where they could have scored a touchdown earlier than they did in the fourth quarter, and that cost them in terms of winning the game ultimately. But the talent finally shone through. We finally got to see all the reasons why he was the first overall pick. We're at the point now where he's got 9 or 10 games under his belt. The game's starting to slow down a little bit for him. He's functioning inside structure and outside of structure. He's a quarterback who needs a coaching staff that's going to embrace the wildness of him, embrace the lack of control that they have with him, which is kind of the antithesis of what you want to be as a coach. You want to control everything. You want to have structure everywhere, because that's the way you have consistency and repeat things all the time. But when you've got a quarterback like Caleb Williams, I think you've got to look at Pete Carroll in Seattle, where he gave Russell Wilson a strong running game, but said in the passing game, if you want to extend plays and create outside the pocket, go for it. Same thing that Mike Tomlin did with Ben Roethlisberger. Look, we're going to give you a structure with Todd Haley as much as we can, but when you want to try and make defenders miss and create outside of the design of everything, go for it. He needs his coaching staff to embrace that, and the more games he has like this weekend, the more plays he makes like he made this weekend, the easier it is for that coaching staff to do that, to argue that upwards towards the GM and the owner, and that's what they're going to build moving forward. But for the most part, it was just like finally a sense of relief of, oh yeah, that's why you were picked ahead of Jaden Daniels. That's the upside that everyone saw. That's why everyone has a lot of hype around you and is really excited about you moving forward. You finally showed it against proper NFL defenders, and in saying that, a very, very good NFL defense in the Vikings. So the Vikings defense did not play poorly at all in this game. They were just beaten by a quarterback who was executing on a level they couldn't keep up with.
They're 2 games back from the wildcard teams. Are they out?
No, definitely not. But they're one of those teams, I think, like, you wouldn't necessarily want to play them because they do have a level of talent there, like DJ Moore with Montez Sweat on the defensive side. They have guys who can make big plays and put you in bad positions. But I do kind of feel like, and as I was watching the game, it feels like because they have guys who can make big plays, but they don't have a consistency of speed in their offense. So like when you have Keenan Allen, you can kind of shut him down now in man coverage because he's just that bit older. You have Odunze, who's kind of struggled with his consistency because he's a rookie, and DJ Moore scored a screen touchdown where he showed off his explosiveness against the Vikings. But for the most part, they're not really hitting like 40-yard throws, or they're not really trying to hit 40 and 50-yard throws, which winds up they're kind of playing in this box, which forces Caleb Williams to make the plays that Mahomes makes when he's a scrambler. And I just think at this stage of his career, you would need that Mahomes level of consistency that Williams doesn't have for them to be carried through the playoffs. But I think they'd be a team that we'd all be happy to see to get in the playoffs because you have that rookie quarterback, you have that exciting option. So maybe it'll happen. I think it's definitely not out of the question mark at this point. I think the only thing with them is, if I'm not mistaken, they have like a really difficult schedule. I think they still have 2 games left against the Lions, for example.
Yeah, and they've lost 5 in a row, so it's difficult to get that stink off even when you start playing well.
Yeah.
Look, it's interesting. At the moment, they would be picking 12th if the season ended today. So that's actually quite a high pick still to layer in a little bit of more good quality talent around the QB. And it might be better for them if they don't make a late season run and actually do continue to get really good high-end talent in when it looks like
they need it.
And it looks like they've made some good decisions in recent years when it's come to the draft as well. So, all right, briefly before we move to the games on Thanksgiving, which is this Thursday, the CJ Stroud issues, are they compounding? Is he carrying an injury? Is there something more serious than that? What do you think?
As far as I know, he's not injured, and I wouldn't say any of his performance is suggesting injury. It's decision-making and reacting to pressure. So this Texans loss to the Titans it's kind of hard to believe. I know like the Titans have been awful, but Will Levis made some plays. To be fair to him, he showed up well in different moments, and Tony Pollard is still a very, very dangerous running back. So those are 2 options in the offense there that actually, when it all comes together, that's kind of explainable. Like from the defensive side of the ball, the Texans defense is really boom or bust in the game. They had more than 5 sacks, but they also kept giving up these gigantic plays. Their safeties were particularly bad, especially on 2 of the long touchdowns. But to focus on the main thing here, Stroud, he had 2 interceptions, and one of them was at the end of the second quarter that gave the Titans a free 3 points. One of them was in the second half in a key moment where he just didn't hold the ball long enough and threw the ball straight to a defender. And that's kind of what he's looked like a little bit more this year. There's been that little bit of panic. Like he had a safety at the end of the game where he didn't really need to run into the back of the end zone the way he did. He put himself in position to be sacked, and he kind of beat his own pass protection. I think it's a combination of playing behind an offensive line that gives up too much pressure, playing in an offensive line that's giving up too many penalties, that's moving them backwards all the time. They're behind it down in distance far too often. But then it's also, when he had success last year, it was a lot of Bobby Slowick's influence on a handful of not a handful of plays, but a handful of concepts with different variations of them that pulled the defense apart, that made everything work really well for the offense. Now, after a year of watching that and after playing against it, teams have caught up slightly, and they're trying to push that team away from the concepts that they love and force Stroud to pick the defense apart a little bit more on underneath and shorter throws. And he's just not seeing that the way he does the vertical shots and the shot play design. So I'm not like concerned about him long term. I still think he's be a very, very, very good quarterback over the long term. But it's definitely been one of those second years that a lot of players have where they have to make more adjustments and they have to learn a bit more after everything went their way as a rookie. I think the Texans are still a very, very good team as well. I think they will be a contender in the playoffs. But I think the concerns we have to have at this point is you're looking at them as a team that will get hot going into the playoffs, hopefully, rather than a team that you expect to compete with the Ravens and with the Chiefs and with the very best in the league. Because previously, I think we would have said you expect them to be amongst the best teams in the league. Now, I think you're probably talking about them as like the second tier of teams that have all the talent to be brilliant and to knock anyone else off. Like, because the one thing about this game against the Titans as well is like Nico Collins had like an incredible game. He was phenomenal. So, and Joe Mixon was pretty good. Tank Dell had one play that he didn't make that he should have made, but overall he was pretty good as well. So everything was pretty good, and they still lost to the Titans. So, like, that's a bigger concern than if the whole team just shows up and plays like crap on a Sunday, you know?
Yeah, okay. Or else it's one of those games that we look back at the end and go, well, that was mad, but actually it didn't matter. That's the difficulty with a lot of these games, that somehow a bad team plays really well against a good team, and you draw too many conclusions about the relative state of both of them. So anyway, let's wait and see. The last thing to do is preview the games for Thanksgiving. So it's Lions-Bears. The Lions, who every year everybody had to sit through on Thanksgiving, go, why is this terrible team given such a platform? Now everybody's like, this is exactly what you want on a holiday day. sitting around drinking, watching the best and most exciting team in football at the moment?
Well, it's particularly important for us because this is the early game. Like, this is the game that's on at 6 o'clock. This is the game that we'll all get to see realistically. You're not going to stay up and watch a Packers Dolphins unless you have that flexibility in your day on a Thursday night, because that's on 1 a.m. But the Lions and Bears, like I just talked about Caleb Williams and how good he is. If we get that Caleb Williams again against that Lions defense, we could be talking about another 45, 35 type of game here where you just got so much going well. Like, I kind of... The concern you have is you got the Lions Colts this past weekend. Anthony Richardson, I didn't think it was bad, but he was just, they game planned him well, they were able to contain him well, and he wasn't able to keep up with the Lions offense. Like Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery there scored 2 touchdowns again. Like they're on a record pace now for the 2 of them scoring in the same game. I don't know the exact numbers on it, but they're historically number 1 on it apparently. But the quality of the Lions offense against that Bears defense, I think they'll put up points fairly easily. So if Caleb Williams turns up and plays the way he did last week, I think we'll get a really great game. If he struggles more like he has in earlier weeks, then yeah, we probably won't get the game we're looking for. But I'd be excited to watch this and actually see, like, there's a lot of intrigue to it. There's a lot of players here who are worth watching and trying to figure out how their seasons are going to go from here on out, both in terms of the Bears building for the future and the Lions building for what we expect them to be, a playoff run and an assault on the NFC Championship.
The Cowboys Giants, there was a lot of excitement around the world that perhaps Daniel Jones would already have signed. And maybe by the end of the show, we'll know exactly who Daniel Jones will be playing for, and that the Cowboys would put him straight in against the Giants. Unfortunately, that's very unlikely to happen, I think, because the backup Cowboys QB turned out to be better than Dak Prescott.
Yeah, it's one of those games where it's like, we want Daniel Jones to sign with the Giants because it might make it interesting. Besides that, what do we really care about this game?
Exactly.
I know the Giants just beat the Commanders, but like, the Cowboys just beat the Commanders, but like, who's getting excited for Tommy DeVito versus Cooper Rush? Like, those even don't sound like real names. What are we doing?
And then the Packers absolutely annihilated the 49ers, who lost their QB, lost Nick Bosa. It looks like a bit of a lost season for them at this stage. But what's the truth about the Packers? Are they a team who have enough talent on both sides to actually go deep in the playoffs?
Someone said to me that the 49ers had only 2 starters on defense this past weekend from their Super Bowl starting lineup in February. I don't know if that's true, but it was Lemonade and Fred Warner, I think. I don't know if that's true or not, but that tells you the state of the 49ers and where they're at, considering their offense is beat to hell. Their defense is actually in worse condition. We just don't even realize it. I think the Packers are one of my favorite teams to watch, regardless of how good you expect them to be, just because of how good Jordan Love is and the way he plays. But on Sunday, it was all about Josh Jacobs and running the ball, and that's the kind of balance they have there. So I think they're a team in the NFC that you'd kind of be really excited to watch in any playoff game. The Dolphins need this game, I think. The Dolphins maybe they're already out of it. I don't think they are. They're probably still hanging back. They can sneak in as a wildcard team. They can still be a problem in the playoffs, I think, if they get to that chance. But this is a really big test for them. I think this is the type of game where Tua in the past wouldn't have shown up and wouldn't have played well. I think he needs this big game, and while his team needs it as well. I think the Packers are just a better football team, though. Like, the Christian Watson is starting to come out a bit. Romeo Doubs is starting to come out. You're starting to get these wide receivers in positions where they can make big plays. I know they didn't have massive numbers on Sunday, but that goes back to the balance we just talked about with Josh Jacobs. So I think that could potentially be, like the Lions Bears, an incredible game of football. So if you are staying up and you are thinking about staying up on Thanksgiving night to watch the NFL, that one might be worth it. Now, I can't promise you, but I think it might be worth it just to watch Jordan Love. Like, the funny thing about it is, you've got 2 polar opposite quarterbacks. You've got Jordan Love, who wants to rip the ball 40 yards downfield on every single play, and you've got Tua, who's terrified of throwing past 4 yards unless it's wide open. So there's a great clash of styles there too. You'll get to see the full remit of NFL offenses right now. And
all the teams are playing this weekend as well, so everybody has a game. This is the bit where there are no buys from this week. And so everything starts to matter at this point. If you get injuries, they're going to take you out of contention. But if you start to get players back and you go on a bit of a run, the Thursday games this weekend, that's the start of a team saying, oh yeah, I think the Patriots certainly for a while had this truism that the season didn't really start. Am I mixing this up? Was it? No,
yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if it was the Patriots, but I've heard this before. But it's also like the kind of thing you can say if you're in a division where you've already got 8 wins.
Yeah,
it's not like the Panthers can't exactly go, yeah, our season starts now. I don't think.
Cian, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Thank you.